The unscheduled truth. The CEO who couldn't buy time. Alexander White had dedicated his life to building an empire, controlling every aspect of his world with precision. He didn't believe in surprises until the day two 10-year-old boys walked into a luxury hotel, looked him squarely in the eye, and uttered 4 words that shattered everything he thought he knew. The shocking hook. "You are our father." In that instant, the billionaire CEO's meticulously constructed life crumbled, leaving him with a question he had never asked himself before. What if success wasn't the most important thing he had built? Alexander White was accustomed to luxury. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, he had spent years perfecting his life, ensuring everything ran exactly as he wanted. His time was valuable, his schedule precise, and his world free of surprises. That's why, when he entered the lobby of the prestigious Grand Meridian Hotel in New York, his mind was already occupied with the details of his upcoming business meetings, not with the possibility that his entire life was about to be turned upside down. The hotel's marble floors shone under the chandelier lights, and the murmur of conversations from wealthy guests blended seamlessly with the classical music playing softly in the background. Alex approached the reception desk, preparing to check into his penthouse suite, when he heard a hesitant, yet determined voice behind him. "Mr. White." At first, he barely registered the voice, assuming it was a hotel employee, but something in the tone made him turn around. A few feet away stood 2 boys, no older than 10, identical in every way. Dark brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and expressions that combined nervousness and determination. Their clothes were clean, but it was evident they were not costly, and one of them clutched a worn backpack as if it were the most important thing he owned. Alex frowned slightly, confused by their presence. "Yes," he replied, his voice even but cautious. The boys exchanged a look, as if silently deciding which of them should speak. Finally, the one holding the backpack stepped forward. "We need to talk to you," he said, his voice firmer than Alex expected for a child his age. Alex glanced around the lobby, noticing a few curious looks from nearby guests. He had no idea who these children were or why they were addressing him so directly, but something in their expressions unsettled him. "I'm sorry, but I don't know you." The second boy, who had remained silent until that moment, took a deep breath and looked Alex directly in the eye. "You are our father." For the first time in years, Alexander White was speechless. The noise of the lobby faded into the background as his brain tried to process what he had just heard. That was impossible. He had no children. He had never married, and he certainly had never been in a situation where he had fathered 2 children unknowingly. A moment passed, and when he didn't respond, the first boy continued. "Our mom, she passed away a few weeks ago. Before she died, she told us who you were." Alex felt an unexpected chill run through him. There was something in the way they spoke, the conviction in their words, that made it difficult to immediately dismiss them. His instincts told him this wasn't a scam, and yet the logical part of his mind refused to accept the possibility. "Who was your mother?" he asked, his voice lower now. "Lillian Brooks," the second boy immediately replied. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't thought about Lillian in nearly a decade, but hearing that name now from these children claiming to be his sons brought the memories flooding back. They had been together for a short time, one of those intense, fleeting relationships that burned bright and ended abruptly. She had been kind, full of life, but their worlds were too different. She had left without a word, and he had never seen her again. The pieces started clicking into place in a way he didn't like. The timing, the boy's age, their resemblance to him, which he could no longer ignore now that he was truly looking at them. A tightness settled in his chest. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, more to himself than to them. The boy with the backpack shrugged. "We don't know, but she told us you were our dad, and now she's gone. We had nowhere else to go." Alex ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. This was impossible, and yet there they were, standing before him, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about his past. He wasn't sure what disturbed him more, the fact that they might be telling the truth, or the realization that if they were, he had missed 10 years of their lives without even knowing they existed. "Come with me," he said finally, his voice firm but calm. The boys exchanged another look before nodding in unison. Alex led them toward the elevator, his mind swirling with 1,000 questions, none of which had an answer yet. If they were telling the truth, if Lillian had hidden this from him all these years, then his life was about to change in a way he would never have prepared for. And for the first time in his meticulously controlled world, Alexander White had no idea what was going to happen next. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent, except for the occasional ding of the lift. As they passed each floor, Alex stood with his hands in his pockets, stealing glances at the boys beside him. Now that he had time to truly look at them, the resemblance was undeniable. The sharp angles of their faces, the way they slightly furrowed their brows when deep in thought, even the way they stood, straight-backed and quietly observing everything around them, reminded him of himself. It was unsettling. When the elevator doors opened, Alex led them into his penthouse. A sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The boys hesitated at the entrance, their gazes sweeping over the immaculate furniture, the perfectly organized decor, the cold elegance of the space. It was evident no children had ever lived there. There were no scattered toys, no signs of warmth or chaos. Just a home built for a man who had spent years prioritizing work above all else. "Come in," Alex said, gesturing for them to enter. He walked to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator before turning to face them. "We should start from the beginning. How did you find me?" The boy with the backpack, whom Alex was starting to assume was the more outgoing of the two, unzipped it and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward Alex. "Mom left us this." Alex hesitated before taking it. His fingers tightened slightly around the paper as he unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakably Lillian's, neat, slightly slanted, with a certain fluidity he had always found beautiful. "Alex, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Jake and Oliver have come looking for you. I know you probably have a million questions, and I wish I could be the one to answer them. The truth is, I made the decision a long time ago not to tell you. You were building your future, and I didn't want to be the one to interrupt it. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that the boys would be better off not knowing a father who was too busy for them. But now I see I was wrong. They deserve to know who you are, and you deserve to know them. They are good boys, Alex. Smart, kind, stronger than they should have to be. And now they have no one but you. I hope you do right by them. Lillian." Alex let out a slow sigh. His fingers tightened around the letter before he carefully placed it on the counter. He wasn't sure what frustrated him more, the fact that Lillian had hidden them from him for 10 years, or the fact that she had been right. If she had told him back then, would he have been ready? Would he have taken responsibility? Or would he have convinced himself that his career was more important than raising 2 children? He felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the boys, his sons. "Jake and Oliver, you've been alone since she passed away?" His voice was lower now, less controlled than he would have liked. Oliver, the quieter one, finally spoke. "We stayed with a neighbor for a while, but she couldn't keep us. Social services were going to put us in foster care, so we ran away." His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, something cautious, reserved. Alex ran a hand over his face. "You ran away? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Jake raised his chin slightly, defiant. It was better than being separated. That hit Alex harder than he expected. The idea of them being separated, thrown into a system where no one knew or cared about them, made something cold settle in his chest. He exhaled, trying to process everything. Finally, he nodded. Okay, you're staying here. The boys exchanged glances, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. Just like that? Oliver asked. Alex leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Just like that. You said you had nowhere else to go. Now you do. For a long moment, neither boy spoke. Then, slowly, Jake nodded, as if accepting that this was real. Oliver followed a second later. Alex took a deep breath. He had no idea what he was doing, no idea how to raise two 10-year-old boys. But he was certain of one thing. He wasn't going to let them go. Not now. And not ever. The unscheduled routine. Alex had always been a man who thrived on control. He had built his life around order, beginning, and careful planning. But now, for the first time in years, he felt completely out of his depth. Less than 24 hours had passed since Jake and Oliver walked into his life, and already everything felt different. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm or a meeting, but because the silence of the penthouse felt heavier than before. He was accustomed to silence. In fact, he preferred it. But now that he knew two children were sleeping down the hall, the quiet unnerved him. He got up, pulled on a t-shirt, and walked out into the hallway, stopping outside the guest bedroom, where they had stayed the previous night. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open gently and found the room mostly intact, save for the two backpacks sitting near the bed. The bed itself was empty. His heart gave a little jump as he spun toward the living area, his mind instantly leaping to the worst-case scenario. What if they were gone? What if they had decided they didn't want to stay here with a stranger who barely knew what he was doing? But as soon as he entered the open space of the penthouse, he saw them. Both boys were sitting on the floor in front of the coffee table, quietly eating bowls of cereal. Jake was flipping through TV channels with the remote, while Oliver sat cross-legged, intently focused on a book. Both turned to look at him as he walked in. "You're up early," Jake said, before returning to the TV. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "So are you," Oliver shrugged. "We're used to getting up early." Alex ran a hand over the back of his neck. He wasn't sure what the protocol was here. He was supposed to ask if they had slept well, if they needed anything. He wasn't even sure what kids typically ate for breakfast, but by the looks of it, they had already solved that on their own. He walked into the kitchen, glancing at the cereal box on the counter. "You guys just helped yourselves?" Jake looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "We didn't think you'd cook." Alex smiled slightly. "Good deduction." He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching them. It was strange, this feeling of not knowing what came next. He was used to walking into meetings with a plan, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But with Jake and Oliver, he was just going moment by moment, unsure what the right move was. Then he said, "So, I thought today we could go shopping for some things. Clothes, school supplies, whatever you need." Jake looked at him suspiciously. "Don't you have people who do that for you?" Alex inhaled. "Yes, sir." "Yes, I do. But I thought you'd want to pick out your own stuff." Oliver put down his book and studied him. "We're going to school?" Alex paused for a second. That was something he hadn't thought about yet. He knew they had probably missed a lot of school, considering everything they had been through. But the idea of enrolling them, of making it official, suddenly made everything feel even more real. "Yes," he said after a moment, "but we'll take it one step at a time." The boys exchanged another look, as if silently debating whether to argue. Finally, Jake just shrugged and went back to his cereal. Later that morning, Alex took them to a downtown department store. He wasn't used to shopping for anything other than expensive suits and watches, so walking through the aisles of children's clothing felt like entering completely foreign territory. The boys, however, seemed to know exactly what they were doing. They chose jeans, hoodies, sneakers, simple, practical things. They didn't gravitate toward anything flashy or expensive. And Alex noticed how often they checked the price tags before adding something to the cart. "You don't have to worry about the cost," he said, as he watched them hesitate over a pair of sneakers. Jake looked at him. "We're just not used to it." Alex frowned slightly. He knew they had lived modestly with their mother, but the fact that they were so cautious about money at their age made something in his chest tighten. He didn't want them to feel like they had to hold back. "You're not going to go crazy and buy 10 pairs of shoes," he said. "But you also don't have to act like I'm going to take everything away if you choose something nice." Jake hesitated. Then, finally, he nodded, grabbing the sneakers he wanted. After the shopping trip, they stopped at a small restaurant for lunch. The boys were quieter than before, but not in an awkward way. It was as if they were still adjusting to this new reality, just as he was. As they ate, Alex found himself watching them closely, noticing their small differences. Jake was the more outgoing, always the first to answer, always with a comment or a sharp question. Oliver was quieter, more observant, the type who thinks before speaking. It was strange how quickly Alex could see parts of himself in both of them. "Do you want to do anything else today?" he asked as he finished his coffee. Oliver paused thoughtfully. "Can we go to a bookstore?" Alex blinked. "Too surprised, as a bookstore?" Oliver nodded. "Mom used to take us all the time." Alex wasn't sure why, but that affected him in a way he didn't expect. He had spent years without knowing they existed, and now, suddenly, there were these small details, pieces of their lives, that he had never been a part of. He had missed their first words, their first steps, their birthdays. He hadn't been there when their mother read them bedtime stories, when she took them to bookstores, when she shaped them into who they were. But he was here now, and maybe that was what mattered. "Yes," he said, nodding. "We can go to a bookstore." Jake smirked. "You don't look like the kind of person who reads much." Alex chuckled. "I do read. Just not for fun." Oliver smiled for the first time that day. "Maybe we'll find something to change that." Alex wasn't sure what kind of father he was supposed to be. He didn't have the answers. He didn't have a manual on how to do this right. But as he sat there with his sons, he realized he didn't need to have everything figured out right away. He just needed to show up. And for now, that was enough. The true measure of value. Alex had always been a man of routine. Every part of his day was planned from the moment he woke up until the second he went to sleep. His world revolved around schedules, efficiency, and control. But now, with 2 10-year-old boys living under his roof, his carefully constructed life was beginning to shift in ways he never expected. The first major adjustment was the noise. His penthouse had always been silent, a place where he could think without distraction, where the only sounds were the hum of the city outside his floor-to-ceiling windows and the occasional beep of his phone. Now there were footsteps running down the hall, the clatter of dishes as the boys fixed their own breakfasts, the muffled sounds of laughter and disputes as they talked in the other room. He hadn't realized how silent his life had been until they arrived. One morning, as he walked into the kitchen, he found Jake standing on one of the chairs, trying to reach the top shelf where Alex kept the cereal. Oliver stood nearby with his arms crossed, clearly unimpressed with his brother's method. "You're going to fall," Oliver said, watching him struggle. Jake ignored him, stretching further. "I got it." Alex leaned against the counter and raised an eyebrow. "Could you just ask for help?" Jake spun his head sharply, startled. and nearly lost his balance. Alex grabbed his arm before he could fall and set him back down on the floor. Jake sighed in annoyance. "I had it." "Sure you did," Alex said, amused, before reaching up and handing him the cereal box. Oliver smiled. "I told you." As the boys ate at the counter, Alex poured himself a cup of coffee and sat facing them. He watched them closely, trying to process the fact that just days ago, he hadn't even known they existed. Now, they were part of his daily life. They fit into his space in a way that was both strange and curiously natural. Jake broke the silence. "So, what exactly do you do all day?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? You're always checking your phone with a serious look. Is your job just being a businessman?" Alex smiled. "Pretty much." Oliver looked up. "Do you like it?" The question made Alex pause. No one had ever asked him that before. His whole life, his career had been about climbing, earning more, succeeding. He never stopped to think if he actually enjoyed it. "I'm good at it," he said finally. Jake leaned back in his chair. "That's not the same thing." Alex studied him, slightly impressed. "No, it's not." The conversation drifted after that, but the question stayed with Alex. Did he truly enjoy the life he had built, or had he simply convinced himself that success equaled happiness? He pushed the thought aside. He had more immediate things to solve, like what he was supposed to do with the boys all day. "Since you're going to be staying here for a while, we need to arrange some things," he said. "School, activities, maybe sports, but interested in." Jake shrugged. "I used to play baseball." Oliver nodded. "I like art." Alex made a mental note. "Okay, first we'll look for schools. Then we'll look into sports and art classes." Jake narrowed his eyes. "You really don't know how to do this, do you?" Alex let out a silent laugh. "Not a bit." Oliver tilted his head. "Then why are you trying?" That question cut deeper than Alex expected. He could have easily hired someone to take care of all this. Tutors, nannies, assistants, people who actually knew how to care for children. But he didn't want to hand them over to someone else. He had already lost 10 years with them. He wasn't going to lose one more, because they're my sons, he said simply. The boys exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. It was evident they weren't used to hearing that. Maybe they weren't sure if they believed him yet. After breakfast, they spent the day looking for schools. Alex had always assumed choosing a school was just a matter of selecting the most prestigious one. But as he watched the boys explore the campuses, he realized it wasn't that simple. They weren't impressed by massive libraries or high-tech classrooms. They cared about things he hadn't considered. Whether the teachers were kind, if there was a baseball field, if there was an art program. Oliver could actually enjoy. At the end of the day, he let them decide. They chose a school that wasn't the most expensive or prestigious, but one that felt right to them. Alex had never let another person make a decision that affected him. But this time, he didn't care. That night, as the boys were getting ready for bed, Alex walked past their rooms and heard them talking. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but their voices were clear through the slightly open door. "Do you think he means it?" Jake asked. "I don't know," Oliver admitted, "but he didn't have to let us stay." There was a pause. Then Jake sighed. "I guess we'll see." Alex stood there for a moment before quietly walking away. He had spent his whole life proving his worth in business, showing people he was capable, reliable, powerful. But for the first time, he realized he had something else to prove. He had to prove to his sons that he wasn't going anywhere. The amusement park test. The first few days with Jake and Oliver had been an adjustment, but Alex quickly realized that adapting to this new reality would require more than just fixing up their rooms and choosing a school. The boys were polite and respectful, but there was still a distance between them, an invisible wall built from years of not knowing each other. They had lived an entire life without him. And as much as he wanted to fix things, trust wasn't something that could be built overnight. One morning, as he walked into the kitchen, he found Oliver sitting on the counter, drawing in a sketchbook. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his pencil moving smoothly across the page. Jake, on the other hand, was standing in front of the open refrigerator, staring at its contents as if waiting for something to magically appear. "Are you just going to stand there all morning, or are you going to choose something?" Alex asked, leaning against the counter with his coffee. Jake turned his head slightly. "I'm thinking." Alex smiled. "You think a lot for someone who eats the same thing every day." Jake rolled his eyes and grabbed a yogurt while Oliver continued drawing, seemingly lost in his own world. Alex glanced at the paper, seeing a detailed sketch of the city skyline. "You're quite good," Alex said, pointing to the sketchbook. Oliver looked up, his expression unreadable, then shrugged. "Mom taught me." Alex felt that familiar pang of guilt every time the boys mentioned their mother. He hated knowing how much of their life he had missed. He didn't know what Lillian had been like as a mother, but he knew she must have been good. She had raised them to be independent, smart, and much more mature than most children their age. "She must have been proud of you," Alex said. Oliver hesitated for a second, then nodded slightly. "She always said I could do anything, if I worked hard enough." Alex took a sip of his coffee, watching him closely. She was right. Oliver looked surprised, as if he wasn't used to hearing that from anyone but his mom. Jake, who had been eating in silence, suddenly spoke. "What about you? What did your parents teach you?" The question caught Alex off guard. His parents weren't exactly the type to sit down with him and offer life lessons. His father had been ruthless in business and expected the same from him, while his mother had always been more concerned with social appearances than parenting. He had spent most of his life proving his worth to them, making sure he never failed, because failure was not an option in the White family. "They taught me to work hard," Alex said simply. Jake studied him. "That's it?" Alex put down his coffee. "That's what mattered to them." Oliver slightly tilted his head. "Is that what matters to you?" Alex wasn't sure how to answer that. For most of his life, success had been everything. Building his company, increasing his wealth, ensuring he never showed weakness. But sitting here now, seeing these two boys who were his sons, yet still felt like strangers, he wasn't sure if the things he once valued truly meant as much as he thought. "I used to think so," he admitted. "But things change." Jake didn't press further, but the way he looked at Alex made it clear he was still trying to figure him out. Later that afternoon, Alex decided to take them to one of the sports complexes he had a membership at. It was a high-end facility, the kind meant for professional athletes and executives who wanted exclusive access to the best equipment. He hadn't been there in months, but it was the first thing that came to mind when he thought about what to do with two energetic 10-year-old boys. When they arrived, Jake's eyes lit up at the sight of the baseball field. "Can we play here?" Alex nodded. "Yes, you said you used to play, right?" Jake grinned. "Yeah, but never somewhere like this." Oliver, meanwhile, was more interested in the basketball court. He wasn't as excited as Jake, but Alex could see the curiosity in his eyes. "You can do whatever you want," Alex said. "Just don't break anything." Jake ran off toward the batting cages while Oliver headed to the court, experimentally bouncing a ball. Alex sat in the stands watching them, feeling strangely out of place. He was used to leading board meetings, negotiating contracts, making multi-million-dollar decisions. But sitting here watching his sons just be kids, he realized how unfamiliar this world was to him. After a while, Jake trotted over, slightly breathless. "You play." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Baseball? Not since I was your age." Jake tossed him a glove. "Then let's see if you're any good." Alex sighed but stood up, rolling his shoulders. "Fine. But if I embarrass myself, we're never talking about this again." Jake smiled. "Deal." To his own surprise, Alex wasn't terrible. He wasn't an expert, but he could catch and throw well enough to keep up with Jake. Oliver eventually joined in, and for the first time since they had arrived, Alex saw them laugh. Really laugh. Not just polite smiles or small smirks. At one point, Alex saw Jake look at him with something that almost looked like approval. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time they left, the boys were exhausted, but happy. As they got into the car, Jake turned to Alex. "Today wasn't bad." Alex smiled. "That's the kindest thing you've said to me so far." Jake shrugged. "You're still figuring things out, but you're trying." Oliver nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and that's more than we expected." Alex wasn't sure if that was supposed to make him feel better or worse. He knew he had a long way to go before they fully trusted him, but at least he was making progress. As they drove back to the penthouse, Alex found himself looking at them in the rearview mirror. Maybe he wasn't the kind of father they needed yet, but for the first time in his life, he was willing to learn. Building the unplanned family. The following days were filled with small but significant adjustments. Alex had spent years living alone, accustomed to silence, order, and a lifestyle centered around work. Now, he was slowly adapting to having two 10-year-old boys in his penthouse, which meant noise, unpredictability, and an ever-growing list of things he had never thought about before, like making sure there was food they actually wanted to eat, figuring out their school enrollment, and learning what it meant to be responsible for someone other than himself. One evening, after a long day at the office, he walked into the penthouse and found the boys in the living room. Oliver was sitting on the sofa drawing in his sketchbook as usual, while Jake was lying on the floor, tossing a baseball and catching it. There were empty snack wrappers on the coffee table, a lost sock near the sofa, and a half-open backpack with school forms spilling out. It was a mess, but for some reason, Alex didn't feel the usual irritation he might have felt before. Instead, he just sighed and put down his briefcase. Jake barely glanced at him. "You look tired." Alex smiled. "Is it that obvious?" Oliver looked up from his sketchbook. "You work too much. That's what happens when you run a company." Alex chuckled, sinking into the armchair. "Like what?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. Something fun." Alex tilted his head slightly. He had spent his entire adult life building his business, pushing harder with each passing year. Fun wasn't exactly something he had prioritized. Even when he traveled, it was for work. Even when he went to events, they were strategic networking opportunities. He hadn't done something just for the sake of enjoyment in longer than he could remember. "What do you guys consider fun?" he asked. "Baseball, obviously." Oliver tapped his pencil against the sketchbook. "Reading, drawing, just having time to do things you actually like." Alex thought about that. His life had been built on constant motion, always thinking 10 steps ahead, never slowing down long enough to enjoy the present. Maybe that's why this whole situation with the boys felt so unfamiliar. He had never slowed down enough to know what life outside of work was supposed to be like. Suddenly, an idea occurred to him. "Have you two ever been to an amusement park?" Jake's eyes widened. "A real one?" "With roller coasters?" Alex nodded. Oliver shook his head. "Mom never had time to take us." Alex wasn't sure why, but that affected him in a way he didn't expect. He had spent so long thinking about what he had missed, what he hadn't been present for. But maybe what mattered more was what he was doing now. "Well, I have time now. How about we go this weekend?" Jake looked skeptical. "You? At an amusement park? Dressed in what? A three-piece suit?" Alex smiled. "I have normal clothes, you know." Oliver laughed. "I'll believe it when I see it." By the time the weekend arrived, Alex had arranged for them to visit one of the largest amusement parks outside the city. He had expected it to be chaotic, crowded, and exhausting, which it was, but he didn't expect to actually enjoy it. Jake ran ahead, excited about every ride, dragging Oliver along with him. They started with a roller coaster that had multiple loops, and to his own surprise, Alex found himself going with them. The ride was fast, disorienting, and something he never would have chosen to do on his own. But when they got off and he saw the way the boys were smiling at him, he realized he didn't regret it. Throughout the day, they tried different rides, played carnival games, and even stopped for lunch at one of the overpriced food stands. Jake won a stuffed bear in a basketball toss game and immediately handed it to Oliver, who rolled his eyes, but took it anyway. At one point, while they were waiting in line for another ride, Oliver looked up at Alex and said, "Mom would have liked this." Alex looked at him. "Yeah," Oliver nodded. "She always wanted us to have fun, even when things were tough." Alex swallowed the lump in his throat. He had spent so long thinking about what he had missed, what he hadn't been present for. But maybe what mattered more was what he was doing now. That night, after returning home, the boys collapsed almost immediately, exhausted from the long day. Alex stood in the hallway, looking at their closed doors, realizing how different his life had become in such a short time. This place no longer felt empty. It didn't feel like just a space he lived in. It felt like a home. That evening, as Alex sat in his office, he looked at his phone. His calendar was still full, his schedule still demanding, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about them. Adaptation to life with Jake and Oliver was a slow process, but every day, Alex found himself learning more about what it meant to be a father. It wasn't just about making sure they had food, clothes, or a roof over their heads. It was about the little things, the way Oliver distractedly tapped his pencil against the table when he was thinking, the way Jake always tested the limits of every rule just to see if Alex would actually enforce it, the way both boys hesitated before asking for things, as if they were still unsure if they had the right to. One night, Alex returned home earlier than usual, something he never would have done before the boys came into his life. He walked into the penthouse and found Oliver sitting on the sofa reading a book, while Jake was lying on the floor, tossing a baseball and catching it. There was a faint smell of burnt toast in the air, and when Alex looked toward the kitchen, he saw a plate of half-eaten sandwiches on the counter. "Did you try to cook?" Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. Oliver didn't look up from his book. "We made grilled cheese." Jake smiled. "Sort of," Alex chuckled, walking closer to inspect the mess they had left. "I guess sort of means the first few were a disaster." Jake sat up. "More like Oliver forgot you have to butter the bread first." Oliver gave him a glare. "I didn't forget. I just didn't know." Alex shook his head, amused. "Remind me to teach you how to use the stove properly before you burn the place down." Jake stretched, arms behind his head. "You cook for real." Alex leaned against the counter. "I know how to, I just never have time." Oliver looked at him. "You have time now." The words caught Alex off guard. He had spent his whole life filling every second of his schedule with work, convinced that time was his most valuable asset. But now, for the first time, he was being forced to slow down, and he wasn't sure if he hated it or if he was starting to understand why it mattered. "I guess I do," he said after a moment. "Maybe I'll teach you something that doesn't involve burning bread." Jake grinned. "That sounds like a challenge." The next day, Alex did something he had never done before. He canceled a meeting so he could come home in time to cook dinner with the boys. He didn't tell them beforehand, partly because he wasn't sure if he would actually go through with it. But when he walked through the door with a grocery bag instead of his usual briefcase, their surprise was evident. "You really meant it?" Jake asked, watching Alex set the bag on the counter. Alex rolled up his sleeves. "What? Did you think I was joking?" Oliver got up from the sofa, looking slightly impressed. "I mean, yeah," Alex smiled. "Well, you're about to learn that I don't joke." He wasn't an expert chef, but he knew enough to manage. He taught them how to make pasta from scratch, showing them how to knead the dough, roll it out, and cut it into strips. At first, Jake was more interested in seeing how much flour he could get on the counter, while Oliver focused intensely on making the shapes perfect. Alex found himself surprisingly patient, explaining each step, answering their questions, and watching as they slowly got the hang of it. By the time they were sitting at the table eating the finished product, Jake leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Okay, I admit that was actually fun." Oliver nodded. "It tastes better than the stuff from the box." Alex smiled. "Because you made it yourselves." Jake studied him for a moment, then put down his fork. "You know, you're not as bad at this as I thought you'd be." Alex raised an eyebrow. "In the kitchen?" Jake shrugged. "In all of this." There was something in his tone, something hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to say it out loud. Alex had quickly learned that Jake was the type to test people before trusting them. He wanted to see if Alex was serious, if he would stick around, or if this was just a temporary phase. "I told you," Alex said, meeting his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Jake didn't say anything, but after a moment he nodded. That was enough. After dinner, Oliver stayed at the table drawing in his sketchbook, while Jake flipped through TV channels. Alex stood by the window looking out at the city, thinking about how much had changed in so little time. A few weeks ago, his life had been predictable, controlled. Now it was full of unpredictability, mess, and moments like this, small, meaningful ones. He wasn't sure if he was doing everything right. Probably not. But for the first time, he wasn't just thinking about himself. He was thinking about them. And that had to mean something. The new foundation the following weeks passed in a way that felt both new and curiously natural. At first, Alex had expected the transition to be harder, that the boys would resist his presence in their lives, or that he would struggle to find common ground with them. But slowly, without him realizing it, they had settled into a routine. Mornings were no longer just about rushing out the door to get to the office. Now they included making sure Jake and Oliver had everything they needed for school, checking if Oliver had packed his sketchbook, or reminding Jake not to forget his baseball glove. Nights were no longer filled with silence and late-night work emails. They were now spent watching movies the boys chose, debating which pizza toppings to order, or playing video games that Alex was, without a doubt, terrible at, but enjoyed simply because it made the boys laugh. One Saturday morning, Alex was in the kitchen making coffee when he overheard the boys talking in the living room. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but something in their conversation made him pause. "So, do you think we're staying here forever?" Jake asked, his voice lower than usual. Oliver hesitated before replying. "I don't know. I think so. He hasn't said anything about us leaving." Jake sighed. "Yeah, but what if he changes his mind? What if he decides he doesn't want us around anymore?" Alex felt something tighten in his chest at those words. He had assumed by now they understood he wasn't going anywhere. But hearing the doubt in Jake's voice made him realize that maybe they were still waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart again. They had spent their entire lives knowing what it was like to lose people, not to have stability. It made sense that they struggled to believe this time was different. He walked into the living room, and both boys immediately fell silent, looking at him as if they had been caught doing something wrong. He sat down facing them, putting his coffee cup on the table, and looked them in the eye. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. Jake shifted slightly, looking down. "You say that now, but what if—" "No, hey," Alex interrupted. "The what if is over. I didn't know about you before. That wasn't my choice. But now that I do, I'm not going to pretend you don't exist. You're my sons. That doesn't change just because things aren't always easy." Oliver studied him intently, as if trying to determine if he truly meant it. "Even if we mess up sometimes," Alex smiled. "Especially if you mess up sometimes." Jake let out a small laugh, but there was something lighter in his expression, as if maybe he was starting to believe it. That afternoon, they went to Central Park. It wasn't a big, extravagant outing, just a simple afternoon outdoors. But it felt important. Jake brought his baseball, tossing it between his hands as they walked. Oliver had his sketchbook tucked under his arm. They wandered the paths, stopped to watch a group of street performers for a while, and finally found an open patch of grass where Jake convinced Alex to toss the ball with him. Oliver sat nearby, drawing. Occasionally he looked up at them before returning to his sketch. After a while, Jake tossed the ball back to Alex and smiled. "You're getting better." Alex caught it easily. "I was never bad." Jake smirked. "That's debatable." They played for a bit longer until Oliver finally looked up from his drawing. "I think I'm finished." Jake trotted over and looked over his shoulder. "Let me see." Oliver hesitated. Then he flipped the notebook open for both of them to see. It was a drawing of the three of them. Alex standing in the middle, with Jake holding a baseball glove and Oliver holding his sketchbook. The detail was impressive, but it was more than that. It was the way Oliver had captured the way they stood, the way they seemed to belong together. Alex felt something tighten in his chest again, but this time it wasn't guilt or regret. It was something else, something he wasn't yet sure he had a name for. "This is good," Alex said, studying the sketch. Oliver shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Thanks." Jake grinned. "I look great." "You always think you look great," Oliver muttered, rolling his eyes. They walked back toward the car. As the sun began to set, the city lights starting to twinkle in the distance. When they arrived at the penthouse, the boys went to their rooms, and for a moment, Alex stood in the hallway, listening to the quiet sounds of them moving around. This place no longer felt empty. It didn't feel like just a space he lived in. It felt like a home. That night, as Alex sat in his office, he looked at his phone. His calendar was still full, his schedule still demanding, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about them. And for the first time in his life, that was what mattered most. The meaningful conclusion: this story is not just about unexpected fatherhood. It is about the profound transformation of a man who spent his entire life believing that success was measured only by money and power. Alexander White, accustomed to control and calculation, faced the most challenging test of all, becoming something he had never planned to be: a father. What makes this story special is not just the revelation itself, but the journey the main character undertakes. He doesn't immediately understand that children are not just a responsibility, but a true wealth that cannot be bought or planned. He has to step outside the boundaries of his carefully structured world, learn to trust, to care, and most importantly, to put someone else before himself. The ending of this story is particularly important. It is not idealized. Alexander doesn't instantly become the perfect father, but he does the most crucial thing. He chooses to stay. He chooses not to run from this new reality, but to accept it, learn, and change. And that is the key message. Family is not something that comes pre-made, but something that is built step by step through mistakes, patience, and the willingness to be better. This story demonstrates that true wealth is not found in money, but in the people who are waiting for you. And when Alexander finally realizes that his life has been changed forever, he understands he has made the most important investment of all, in family.